I'm John Kaiser at the Metals Investor Forum in Vancouver, January 28th, 2023. I'm speaking with Chris Herald, CEO of Solitario Zinc Corp. Chris, welcome to Vancouver.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Now, you've got zinc in the name of your company, but the story that's got me super excited is Golden Crest, a very large land position adjoining the Black Hills district, in which 100 million ounces have been identified over the past century, of which I think 2/3 or so were mined from the Homestake deposit itself. There's the potential that this is an undercover mirror image of what was going on to the northeast, and yet this project has very little exploration history. Why is this such an exploration dead zone next door to one of the most prolific gold mining camps in America? And how did Solitario end up in control of this story?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what's interesting is we're still asking ourselves, how did this get missed? Our property position, which is 33,000 acres, like you said, is about 6 or 7 miles from the largest single gold mine in the United States. It's a forgotten district. And so I think for 140 years, most of the time it was controlled by Homestake. And I think everyone thought Homestake, if it was anywhere near Homestake, it would have been found. And so Homestake, that isn't how Homestake operated. They just stuck to the deposit itself. They didn't see any end to the deposit, and they were right for about 100 years, and then they started seeing the end of it. And they did a little exploration outside of that, but almost nothing. So we got into it when a private group came to us that had a young geologist that kind of put this story together, looked at it, went out in the field in an area that everyone thought was devoid of gold because it had these carbonate limestones sitting on the surface. And most of it, the outcrops, and there was hardly any outcrops of rock, most of them looked barren and uninteresting. Well, they had just finished logging in this area. He started following the roads that had been churned up by the equipment, and he started seeing rocks that weren't barren looking. They looked like they were mineralized, and he started analyzing, and he got a lot of samples that were very anomalous in gold and a couple that were multi-gram gold. So he came to us about 2.5 years ago, him and the backers, which was a private group of oil guys actually, and said, I put this together. No one seems interested in it. What do you guys think? We looked at it, and our first reaction is we really loved the concept and the fact that it was unexplored, that it made sense to us, and the plumbing system that developed these gold deposits was identical to the plumbing system of one of our zinc deposits. And that plumbing system is vertical structures and fractures that are mineralized very well. And then, even just as important, out in the horizontal strata, they get mineralized because it's permeable. And that's exactly what we're seeing on our property, and that's what you see on the periphery of the old property. So it was, I think, being in the right place at the right time in terms of seeing this opportunity, and I think it was our experience level, knowing that this could be a very significant property. And the last thing I'd like to say, Homestake represents a deposit type that's called a supergiant, which means it's plus 60 million ounce endowment of gold. There's only 40 supergiants in the world. And every other supergiant has this cloud of big gold deposits around it that generally are in the neighborhood of 2 times the endowment of the supergiant. So you take, let's say, 60 or 70 million times 2, and there ought to be in this region another 120 or 30 million ounces. There isn't. So you're left with the possibility is Homestake the lone supergiant without an endowment, or has it been missed? And our results to date are there's a good chance it's been missed because it's covered by younger rocks.
Now the Wharf system, which is just to the north of the Precambrian basement-hosted Homestake deposit, it's a much younger system that evolved and came through the stratigraphy that's over there. You have several layers of stratigraphy on top of that on your property. This later stage mineralization, which is probably similar to what you're seeing at surface, would not be related to a 1.8 billion year old Homestake type deposit. What is the current thinking about where the Wharf's gold, and it has a silver credit too, which is absent from the basement hosted deposit? Is it somehow linked and harvested these old Precambrian hosted deposits, or is it something completely unrelated that's just coincidental to this area?
No, we believe very much, and I think people who have studied this area believe it's very much related, not in time, but in spatial situation. So again, we go back to this supergiant philosophy, and what happens is when you look across the world, certain fairly small areas, 1,000 square miles or something like that, they're for some reason super enriched in either, it might be copper, what we're searching for is gold. So they're super enriched in gold, and then so you develop the potential for big deposits. And in the Precambrian, the 1.5 billion year old deposits, which is the Homestake deposit, that gold got remobilized from this slab into what's called a banded iron formation. And that forms the basis of a 120-year mine life at Homestake. They mine that banded iron formation. Now, what we think happened then is in tertiary times, which it's 50 million years or so. 50 million years ago, there was a lot of thermal heating of this area and hydrothermal hot springs reaction. And we're pretty confident that this hot springs came from depth, even below potentially the Precambrian basement. And as that hot water migrated, it leached out the gold. It kept going up into the carbonate rocks that are younger. The waters cool down, and the gold precipitates into these structures and into stratigraphic horizons. So it's very much, in our opinion, and I think others, related to the Precambrian. Again, not in time, but in space.
Now, Homestake apparently did drill a few scout holes on the Golden Crest property, and that apparently is the basis for your understanding of the stratigraphy. You know, the various deadwood formations are there that host the Wharf system, which it's been eroded down to over to the northeast. But then you have some younger horizons on top. Based on what you know about these, are any of these horizons likely to be also receptive, so that you would see the bleeding sideways of mineralization, so that you would have sort of pancake type laterally extensive zones, not just vertically structurally controlled zones such as you're now finding with the surface prospecting and trenching?
Yeah. Actually, I think that's one of the more exciting aspects of this. There's two or three of these favorable horizons that are significant. One's called the St. Charles, one's called the Mission Canyon, it's in the middle, and one's called the Deadwood behind. The Mission Canyon was not a huge producer in the old district, but it had several, 200,000 or 300,000 to 600,000 or 700,000 ounce deposits. But the reason they weren't big is they were eroded away. They were sticking out of
they're remnants.
They're remnants. And when you look at Mission Canyon, it's what's called an evaporite type of a rock. And evaporite types of rocks are easily dissolvable by hot water. So what happens as these fractures came up with hot water, it went out in this permeable evaporite, it dissolved the minerals that were there, silicified what it didn't dissolve, and deposited gold. And the Mission Canyon is known as the biggest, most widespread evaporative karst, which is a breccia, in the western U.S. So it represents an enormous potential target for us. I'm real excited about that, even though if you look at the old district, that wasn't the biggest deposits, but they were high grade, half ounce to an ounce, and they had several 100,000 to 600,000 or 700,000 ounces in them, and we have that completely preserved. Then if you go to the lowest formation, which is the Wharf mine and Deadwood Formation, it was the biggest producer in the old district. About 10 million ounces produced, plus what they see in the future. And we have that preserved everywhere on our property. And what we like about it, it's a horizontal zone, and it's 4 miles long, the wharf, and it's over a mile wide. And that represents an easy drill target. That's about 300 to 400 meters in depth. A real easy drilling for us, and it has such a big halo that if we hit even just anomalous gold, we can start vectoring in on the high grade gold. And the high grade gold again was half ounce to an ounce that was mined at the turn of the 19th century, and it was very high grade, very profitable. What they're mining now, this district's still going. What they're mining now, core mining, is open pit, heap leach, a little under 100,000 ounces of gold produced a year.
Well, given the large lateral footprint of the wharf type system within the Deadwood, should we be worried that the Homestake's scout holes didn't find anything?
Yeah, we should be, except for one thing. It's almost amusing. The Homestake holes, after Homestake shut down, were preserved in a core library, and the logs were preserved there. Now, we haven't been able to access the core yet, but we were able to access the logs. Amazingly, those logs, nothing was assayed in the Paleozoic rocks. In other words, the first 1,000 feet. There wasn't one assay taken. Yet, the geologists noted there's significant alteration here. So, that's a pretty interesting combination of statements there. Good alteration, but no assays. So we'll see what happens.
Now, the wharf style mineralization, it's not refractory, is it?
No.
Not like our Nevada, where we also have the carbonates soaking up the Carlin type gold, but it all ends up being refractory.
All the gold deposits that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of pretty much all of them, they will all extract. None of them are refractory. So you should, with standard technology, we should be able to extract the gold.
So if I understood you correctly, Homestake drilled these scout holes, was really just checking the depth of the basement, and they did confirm it's the banded iron formation, Homestake formation itself that hosts the Homestake deposit, and it's not like everything like that's going to be. You have to have been in that right sheared area where the fluid flow ultimately came up, but they didn't assay any of the package on top, so they were never in a position to realize there's smoke. Now, given that the Homestake deposit itself is like a space needle, a near vertical space needle, if something like that is present in the Golden Crest, it'll probably be impossible for you to find, right?
Yeah, well, it is going to be way more challenging than the Paleozoic targets that we have that are laterally extensive. But there's an interesting thing about the old district. Here you had this deposit that was, 50 or 60 million ounces that was underground, but it breached the surface. And in Cambrian times, about 600 million years ago, there were streams that were eroding the Homestake deposit and the gold deposits contained in the Homestake. and they were eroding them and producing placer gold, just like you'd have in the mother lode of California or the Yukon.
This is before those sediments piled up.
That's
on top.
before the carbon, yeah, the limestones piled up. And so you had probably millions of years where the gold was being stripped from the veins that were exposed, redeposited in stream beds, and then you had the seas come back in and put limestones on top. Now, these we call them paleoplacers. They started at kind of a pinpoint where the veins are, and then as you go away from it, they fan out, just like a delta, river delta. And so you have at the source, it might be 100 meters wide. 4 or 5 kilometers away, it's a kilometer and a half wide. So by drilling through the Paleozoics and into the Precambrian, I'm pretty sure we're going to hit conglomerate. We're going to hit horizons that were paleo surfaces. We'll assay for gold, and if we start detecting gold, we can vector in on the source. So it's a really neat model. You know, we're not going to hit it the first hole or the second hole, I don't think. But, you know, once we get a database of maybe 50 drill holes, I think we're going to have a pretty good idea where to go.
Okay. Now, you also have a 30% carried interest in the Florida Canyon project. It's based on the Bongora deposit, which you found, and I think you said the various operators, including Nexa, have spent $80 million or so on it. It's really at the economic study stage, ready to be, put into production with a 2,500 ton per day underground mining operation. And yet Nexa has spent last year and will probably spend much of this year permitting a large number of additional CRD targets within the overall land package. Suppose they start hitting additional sort of CRD Bongora type zones. Does this mean we have to wait another 5-7 years before this gets developed?
Yeah, that's almost a good problem, I'd have to say, but I don't think that's the path that's going to happen here. First of all, we just learned that Nexa's coming in for the first time since COVID. COVID really slowed the project down for a couple years. Now with COVID in the rearview mirror, they're going to start off with a 4,000 or 5,000 meter drilling program, drilling extensions to the south of the Florida Canyon. Concurrent with that, they're permitting about 85 new platforms, which by far is the biggest program ever planned by Nexa. And yes, our partners, which was mostly Nexa, a little bit of Cominco early years for the first 4 years, they've spent in aggregate about $80 million. We have spent about $1 million to find it. And so right now, I see they just finished a very extensive metallurgical program that's helping guide, the thinking of the engineering on this project. The drilling this year hopefully will indicate the Florida Canyon ore body is trending to the south, and we pick it up. And then the drilling next year is on 5 different targets close to Florida Canyon, all within 3 or 4 kilometers. And they have great surface showings, just like Florida Canyon, never been drilled. So I think the 2024 drilling program could be a game changer, and it'll probably reset the thinking of what this project's about. Is it a 2,500 ton per day operation, or is it a 4,000 or 5,000 ton per day operation? I think it'll be the impetus for an accelerated development, because that deposit, if you look at Nexa's current underground mining operations in Peru, the average grade's about 3.5% to 4% zinc equivalent. Our Florida Canyon deposit is 11%. So it's almost 3 times, it's 10 to 11%. It's almost 3 times the grade. And what's even maybe more important, the concentrate that's produced is really clean, and there's very few clean zinc concentrates in the world. It's kind of rare. Zinc concentrates tend to have a lot of iron and a lot of elements that you don't want to have for the smelter. And in this day and age of environmental consciousness and smelter, every smelter in the world would want our Florida Canyon concentrate because it's high grade and it's clean.
So is it reasonable to speculate that maybe what they're doing is simply figuring out what scale the initial milling facility should be, so that you don't want to deplete a mine too quickly and anger the community, but if you have 40 million tons that you'll eventually feed into, you wouldn't want to start with a 2,500 ton per day mill, so that after they do all this work, they're not going to spend 10 years delineating all. They're just going to start doing the permitting for building the mine.
I think that's in their thinking. We really don't know for sure, but when you propose a program like this, I think you're what's behind it is what is the scale. And I know we and I know Nexa both think the scale of this project is bigger, and probably significantly bigger than what we had in our original PEA. So when we get to this major drilling first of all, we'll get an idea about things this year, and then we'll get a really good idea in 2024 of the scale of the Florida Canyon whole regional systems.
So one last question. Solitario is unusual in that you have a TSX listing, Canadian dollars, but also an NYSE AM listing in US dollars. And that means Robin Hooders can buy and sell your stock in any quantity, but it also means these algo trading hedge funds can go in there and hijack your stock like they did in 2020 when you had this bizarre day where the stock went way up and traded huge volume, and then it was all over. But you now have something called the ATM in place, which at the market financing mechanism. How would this work if you produce some results and people have heard, oh yeah, this is the last frontier, gold frontier, and look, they're coming up with support for this whole concept, and the market goes in there and goes berserk on you on the upside? How would this ATM work to help fill your treasury?
Well, it's a really good mechanism. It's been around a long time, but it's gotten popular with a lot of companies in the last 3 or 4 years. And at the market, what you do is you register stock with the SEC in advance. And so it's a shelf registration is what it is. So that sits there unallocated, but registered. And so if you start seeing volume in your stock and you want to raise money, you sell that shelf stock directly into the market. The buyer gets freely trading stock, doesn't even know he's buying shelf stock.
Interesting.
They get freely trading stock. It's just like any other stock. It goes into there. We get a notice from the broker that sold it that says you need to deliver 50,000 shares to us because we had a buyer, and we deliver off that shelf 50,000 shares, and we get a check. And what that does is I think it keeps the market level even because it's at the market. We don't pay huge commissions. We do pay a small commission to the broker that sells it, and that's an individual company. It's not all brokers. You have to set that up with one specific broker, which we've done, and then you get a check 3 days later, a settlement and electronic funds transfer. So if we get a lot of volume into the stock, you can raise millions of dollars within a few days at a low cost, and you don't have a discount to market. You don't have warrants. It's just a really, really smooth way.
Excellent. I've been talking to Chris Herald, CEO of Solitario Zinc Corp. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, John. Pleasure.